I never expected to find him here, 3,000 miles from where I'd left him. My name is Eliza Harlow, and I'd planned my escape with the precision of someone mapping a prison break. New city, new job, new apartment, all carefully orchestrated to erase the phantom pain of a relationship that had consumed 5 years of my life. Seattle's perpetual rainfall seemed the perfect backdrop for starting over, the constant drizzle washing away the remnants of what I'd left behind in Boston. Until today. Medium latte, extra shot, for Eliza. The voice hit me before I saw his face, that distinctive timbre that had once whispered promises against my skin, now announcing coffee orders in a crowded café. My fingers froze around my phone mid-text. Slowly, I lifted my gaze to the barista counter. And there he was. Nate. Nate Weber, with his hazel eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Nate with his perpetually tousled dark hair that I'd run my fingers through countless times. Nate who'd shattered my heart with such crushing totality that I'd fled across a continent to escape the memory of him. Serving coffee. In Seattle. In my new beginning. He hadn't seen me yet. I could still escape, abandon the coffee, walk out, find a different cafe in this city of endless coffee shops. But my body betrayed me, rising from my seat as if pulled by some invisible thread. Medium latte, extra shot, he repeated, eyes on the cup, not yet registering who stood before him. Thanks, I managed, the words scraping my throat like broken glass. His head snapped up at the sound of my voice, recognition dawning in waves, confusion, shock, disbelief. Eliza? The cup wobbled in his hand. What are you? How are you? Here for my coffee, I said, taking the cup with fingers that trembled despite my best efforts. Our hands brushed, that fleeting contact sending electricity crackling up my arm. Thanks. Wait, he said as I turned to leave. Please. Just wait. I shouldn't have stopped. Shouldn't have turned back. Shouldn't have met his gaze. But I did all three. I get off at 4, he said, his voice carrying the same quiet intensity one remembered so well. Can we talk? Please? A cacophony of voices screamed in my mind, run, stay, speak, flee. This was exactly what I'd crossed a continent to avoid. I don't think that's a good idea, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Please, Eliza. His eyes, those damned eyes that had always been my undoing, held mine. Just coffee. Just closure. Closure. The word hung between us, heavy with implication. Wasn't that what I'd been seeking when I'd packed up my life and moved 3,000 miles? Wasn't that what had eluded me all these months? Fine, I conceded, the decision bypassing all rational thought. 4 o'clock. I turned and walked out, coffee forgotten on the counter, heart hammering against my ribs like a frantic prisoner. Outside, Seattle's familiar drizzle had intensified to a proper downpour, but I barely noticed as I walked blindly through the rain, no destination in mind beyond away. Just away. How? How was this possible? What cruel cosmic joke had placed Nate, my Nate, Boston's Nate, behind a coffee counter in Seattle? My phone buzzed in my pocket, Mara, my new friend from work, the one who'd recommended this particular cafe. Had she known? Set me up somehow? But that was impossible. I'd told no one about Nate, had erased all visible traces of him from my life. I ignored the call, ducking under an awning as the rain intensified, wrapping my cardigan tighter around myself. A family hurried past, a mother and father each holding one of their small daughter's hands, lifting her between them over a puddle as she squealed with delight. Nate and I had talked about children. had mapped out a future that extended far beyond the borders of our shared apartment. A future erased with 6 words on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I can't do this anymore, Eliza. No warning. No explanation. Just the abrupt demolition of everything we'd built. And now, somehow, impossibly, he was here. My phone buzzed again, Mara, persistent as ever. Hey, I answered, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Where'd you go? I thought we were meeting at Cascade Coffee. Something came up. I'm sorry. You okay? You sound weird. I closed my eyes, pressing my forehead against the cool brick wall beside me. I'm fine. Just an unexpected complication. I'll tell you tomorrow. Want me to come over tonight? I've got wine and I just downloaded that terrible romance movie you wanted to see. A laugh escaped me, sharp and brittle. Not tonight. I need to handle something mysterious. I want full details tomorrow. Promise, I lied, knowing I'd never tell her, or anyone, about Nate. About how I'd run across the country only to find myself exactly where I'd started. After ending the call, I checked the time, 1:47 p.m. More than 2 hours before I had to face him again. Face the past I'd tried so desperately to outrun. I started walking again, aimless at first, then with growing purpose. If I was going to face Nate, I needed armor. A shower. Clean clothes. A reminder of who I was now, not who I'd been when I was his. By 3:55 p.m., I was back at Cascade Coffee, hair still damp from the shower, dressed in clothes that projected a confidence I didn't feel, dark jeans, a cream silk blouse, boots with enough heel to bring me almost to his height. I chose a table in the corner with sight lines to both exits. Old habits die hard. 5 years as a photojournalist had taught me to always know my escape routes. At exactly 4:01 p.m., Nate emerged from behind the counter, apron gone, hair freshly rumpled as if he'd run his hands through it multiple times. He scanned the café, our eyes meeting across the crowded space. Then he was walking toward me, his gait so achingly familiar I had to clench my hands to keep from fleeing. You came back, he said, sliding into the chair opposite mine, voice tinged with wonder. I said I would. I kept my tone neutral, distant. Professional, as if interviewing a subject rather than facing the man who had once been the center of my universe. I got you another latte. He pushed a cup toward me, steam curling from its surface. Extra shot. I stared at the cup, then at him. Why are you here, Nate? In Seattle, of all places. He looked down at his hands, those hands I knew so well, had memorized in the darkness of countless nights. His right ring finger still bore the small scar from when he'd tried to catch a falling kitchen knife. A ridiculous, heroic gesture that had required 12 stitches and had somehow made me love him more. I could ask you the same thing, he said quietly. I asked first. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Still stubborn, I see. Still avoiding difficult questions, I see, I countered. He conceded with a slight nod. Fair enough. I moved here 4 months ago. After everything. Boston didn't feel right anymore. Too many memories. So you came to Seattle? Randomly? Not randomly, no. His gaze, steady now, met mine. My sister lives here. Remember Abigail? She offered a fresh start. A place to stay until I found my footing. I did remember Abigail, vibrant, loud, fiercely protective of her younger brother. She'd been Nate's only family after their parents died in a car accident during his freshman year of college. I'd met her only twice during our 5 years together. She'd been teaching English in Japan for most of that time. Your turn, Nate said. Why Seattle? I traced the rim of my untouched latte with one finger. Job opportunity. The Seattle Tribune needed a new photography editor. I needed distance. From me, he said softly, not a question. I looked up, meeting his gaze directly. From everything. From what we were. From what we weren't. Pain flickered across his features, there and gone like a lightning strike. I deserved that. You deserved worse, I said, surprising myself with the edge in my voice. He didn't flinch. I know. Silence stretched between us, filled with the ambient noise of the café, espresso machines hissing, customers chatting, rain pattering against the windows. What happened, Nate? I finally asked, the question that had haunted me for months. One day we were planning a trip to the Berkshires, and the next you were gone. No real explanation. Nothing. He dragged a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture nearly undoing me. I was drowning, Eliza, he said finally. After I lost that teaching position at Boston U. I couldn't find another placement. The rejection letters kept coming. I felt like a failure, in my career, in our relationship. You were soaring, getting recognition for your work, and I was stagnant. Dragging you down. That's bullshit, I said flatly. His eyes widened at my bluntness. No, really. That's complete bullshit, I continued, anger bubbling up from some deep reserve I thought I'd exhausted. You weren't dragging me down. We were partners. We were supposed to face those things together. I know that. Now. He swallowed hard. But then. I convinced myself you'd be better off without me. That I was holding you back. So you made that decision for me. Without even talking to me about how you felt. I was wrong, he said simply. God, Eliza, I was so wrong. I realized it a week later, but by then you'd gone. Your number was disconnected. Your friends wouldn't tell me anything. It was like you'd vanished. I stared at him, incredulous. What did you expect? You broke me, Nate. One day we were us, and the next you were telling me you couldn't do this anymore. No discussion. No warning. 5 years ended in a 10-minute conversation. He winced. I've replayed that night 1,000 times. What I should have said. How I should have explained. It wouldn't have changed anything, I said, even as some small, treacherous part of me wondered if it might have. Probably not, he agreed. But you would have known the truth. That it was my failure, not yours. That you are the best thing that ever happened to me. I closed my eyes, his words cutting deeper than any accusation could have. Don't, I said, my voice barely audible. Please don't. When I opened my eyes, he was looking at me with such naked regret that I had to glance away. I'm sorry, he said. That's insufficient, I know. But I am. More than I can ever express. I nodded once, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. Can I ask you something? He ventured after a moment. Depends on the question. Is there someone new in your life? The question, so predictable yet so unexpected, startled a humorless laugh from me. No. I haven't exactly been eager to try again after how spectacularly we ended. A look, was it relief, flashed across his face. And your work? The Tribune, you said? Yes. It's good. Challenging. different from what I was doing in Boston. You always thrived on challenges, he said, a note of pride in his voice that he had no right to claim anymore. And you? I asked, more to shift the focus than from genuine curiosity. Barista seems different from your academic aspirations. It's temporary, he said with a slight shrug. I'm working on my doctorate now, actually. University of Washington. Oh. This new information settled uneasily. Not just passing through, then. Not just a cosmic coincidence to be endured and forgotten. He was building a life here, in my new city, my fresh start. Comparative literature, he continued. The program's excellent. And the schedule works with my coffee shop shifts. I nodded, struggling to formulate a response that wouldn't betray how thoroughly this information had unsettled me. Eliza, he said, his voice dropping to that intimate register that had once been reserved for moments tangled in bedsheets or whispering across dinner tables. Running into you today. I can't help thinking. Don't, I cut him off sharply. Don't say it was fate or destiny or any of that nonsense. It was coincidence, Nate. A statistical improbability, but coincidence nonetheless. He looked taken aback. I was going to say I can't help thinking how different you seem. Now it was my turn to be surprised. Different how? Harder, he said after a moment's consideration. More guarded. Like you've built walls I never saw before. I almost laughed. I wonder why that might be. He accepted the barb with a slight nod. I deserve that. You keep saying that, but I'm not sure you understand what you deserve. I pushed back my chair. I should go. Wait, he said, reaching across the table but stopping short of touching me. Could we meet again? Just to talk. As friends, maybe, someday? Friends. The word was simultaneously too much and nowhere near enough. I don't think that's a good idea, I said, standing and gathering my bag. Please, he said, rising as well. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Or a second chance. Just, don't disappear again. I couldn't bear it. His vulnerability, so unexpected, so at odds with the man who had cut me loose without a backward glance, caught me off guard. I'll think about it, I said finally, the closest to a concession I could manage. Relief washed over his features. Thank you. I nodded once, then turned and walked away, forcing myself not to look back, though I felt his gaze following me until the café door closed behind me. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city gleaming under a rare patch of late afternoon sunshine. I breathed deeply, trying to steady myself, to process the surreal encounter. Nate was here. In Seattle. Not going anywhere. And neither was I. The universe, it seemed, had a perverse sense of humor. 3 days later, I was deep into editing a photo spread on Seattle's homeless crisis when Mara perched on the edge of my desk, 2 cups of coffee in hand. Peace offering, she said, sliding one toward me. Since you've been avoiding me since Monday. I glanced up, guilt washing through me. I haven't been avoiding you. The lie fell flat even to my own ears. Right. And I'm secretly Beyoncé. She folded her arms. Spill. What happened at Cascade Coffee? And don't say nothing because you've been radiating weird energy ever since. I sighed, saving my work before giving her my full attention. It's complicated. Isn't everything? She nudged the coffee closer. Come on, Eliza. We may have only known each other a few months, but I can tell when something's wrong. I hesitated, weighing the relief of unburdening myself against the finality of speaking Nate's name aloud in my new life. I ran into someone, I said finally. Someone from Boston. From my past. Her eyes widened. Ex-boyfriend someone? I nodded. Shit. She leaned forward. Bad breakup? The worst, I admitted. I literally moved across the country to get away from the memories. And now he's here? In Seattle? Her voice had risen enough that a few heads turned in our open-plan office. Shoo, I cautioned. Yes, he's here. Works at that coffee shop you recommended. Getting his doctorate at UW. Cascade Coffee Guy is your ex? Mara looked stunned. The one with the cheekbones and the sad poet eyes? Despite everything, I laughed. That's surprisingly accurate. Damn, girl. Your taste is impeccable. She sobered quickly. But seriously, what are the odds? Seattle isn't exactly a small town. Astronomical, I agreed. And yet, here we are. What happened when you saw him? Did you talk? Run? Throw coffee in his annoyingly perfect face? We talked. Briefly. I turned my coffee cup in slow circles. He wants to meet again. To be friends. Mara's eyebrows shot up. And? What did you say? That I'd think about it. And have you? Thought about it? I sighed. Constantly. Against my will. She studied me, uncharacteristically serious. For what it's worth, I think you should. Should what? Meet him again. Talk. Get closure. I came to Seattle for closure, I pointed out. No, you came to Seattle to run away, she countered gently. That's not the same thing. I started to protest, then stopped, her words striking uncomfortably close to truth. Look, she continued, I don't know what happened between you two. But running into him here, of all places? That's some serious universe shit. Maybe it's happening for a reason. I don't believe in signs from the universe, I said flatly. She shrugged. Then call it a coincidence. But it's a coincidence that's clearly rattled you. Maybe facing it head-on is better than wondering what if. Before I could respond, our editor-in-chief appeared, summoning us to an impromptu meeting. As we gathered our things, Mara gave my arm a gentle squeeze. Just think about it. That's all I'm saying. And I did think about it, through the meeting, through the remainder of my workday, through the bus ride home to my apartment in Queen Anne. I thought about it as I microwaved a sad frozen dinner and ate it standing at my kitchen counter, staring out at the Seattle skyline glittering under a clear night sky. Closure. Was that even possible now? Could any conversation with Nate provide the clean break, the emotional resolution I'd sought by putting 3,000 miles between us? More importantly, did I want it to? The question stopped me cold, fork halfway to my mouth. Did I want closure from Nate? Or did some masochistic part of me want to preserve the pain, to keep it alive as a reminder never to be so vulnerable again? I set down my fork, appetite gone. In its place, a decision crystallized, sharp-edged and clear. Before I could second-guess myself, I pulled out my phone and opened my messages. Nate had given me his number at the café, a scrap of paper I'd shoved into my pocket and then stared at for hours before finally adding it to my contacts. Tomorrow. 7 p.m., Cary Park. I typed, then sent before I could reconsider. His response came almost immediately, I'll be there. Thank you, Eliza. I set down the phone, wondering if I'd just made a terrible mistake. Cary Park was neutral territory, a public space with one of the best views in Seattle. Not the intimate setting of a café or restaurant, but a place we could talk while surrounded by tourists and locals admiring the Space Needle and Mount Rainier framed against the city skyline. A place I could easily walk away from if things went wrong. The next evening, I arrived at Cary Park 15 minutes early, claiming a bench with an unobstructed view of the skyline. The weather had cleared again, offering one of those perfect Seattle evenings that made you forget the usual endless gray. As the minutes ticked closer to 7, my nerves intensified. I found myself unconsciously touching the small scar at my hairline, a souvenir from a tumble I'd taken rock climbing with Nate on one of our weekend adventures. He'd been so concerned, blaming himself for suggesting the climb, caring for me with such tenderness that night. The memory ached in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel in months. That view never gets old. His voice behind me sent a cascade of goosebumps down my arms. I didn't turn. No, it doesn't, I agreed as he settled beside me on the bench, careful to leave space between us. We sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the panorama before us. "Thank you for meeting me," he said finally. "I wasn't sure you would. That makes two of us." He smiled, that crooked half-smile that had once been my favorite sight in the world. "You look nice. More yourself today." I glanced down at my casual attire, jeans, sneakers, a comfortable sweater, realizing he was right. Yesterday I'd armored myself, today I'd simply dressed as myself. "I've been thinking about what you said," I began, focusing on the skyline rather than his face. "About why you ended things." He waited, giving me space to continue. "It still doesn't make sense to me," I admitted. "We'd been through harder times than your job situation. Remember when I was hospitalized with pneumonia and couldn't work for 6 weeks? Or when your sister had that health scare in Japan and you flew out to be with her? We weathered those storms together." He nodded, his expression pained. "I know. That's what makes what I did so inexcusable." "Then why?" I turned to face him fully. "I need to understand, Nate. Not the surface reason you gave at the cafe. The real reason." He took a deep breath, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I was scared, Eliza. Terrified, actually." "Of what?" "Of failing you. Of becoming a burden instead of a partner." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine with raw honesty. "And of how much I needed you. How completely my happiness depended on you. It terrified me to be that vulnerable with another person." I stared at him, processing his words. "So you, what? Decided to blow everything up before I could hurt you? When you put it that way, it sounds cowardly?" I suggested. He winced. "I was going to say irrational. But cowardly works too." We fell silent again, the weight of his confession hanging between us. "What happened after?" I asked finally. "After I left Boston." He dragged a hand through his hair, that gesture so quintessentially Nate that it made my chest ache. "I fell apart," he said simply. "I realized about a week after what I'd done, that I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. I tried to find you, but you were gone. Your friend Charlotte wouldn't tell me anything except that you'd left Boston and didn't want to be found." I remembered Charlotte's fierce loyalty, her protective rage on my behalf. She was looking out for me. "I know. I don't blame her." He paused. "I stayed in Boston for another 3 months, hoping you might come back, that I might run into you somewhere." But then Abigail suggested a fresh start might be good for me too. She was moving back to Seattle from Japan and offered me her spare room. So you came here. So I came here, he echoed. Started the doctoral program. Got the coffee shop job. Tried to rebuild some kind of life. And then I walked in to order a latte. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. The universe has a twisted sense of humor. I couldn't help but smile back, briefly. That's what my friend Mara said. Smart friend. She thinks I should talk to you. Get closure. His expression sobered. Is that what you want? Closure? The question, the same one I'd wrestled with the previous night, hung in the air between us. I thought it was, I said honestly. It's why I moved here. To start fresh. To forget. And now? I looked out at the skyline, watching as the city lights began to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Now I don't know, I admitted. I spent months being angry at you. Hurt. Betrayed. I packed up those feelings with everything else and brought them across the country, thinking I could outrun them. But you couldn't, he said softly. No. I couldn't. I turned to face him again. And now you're here, and it's all complicated. It doesn't have to be, he said, a careful hope in his voice. We could start over. Not where we left off. But somewhere new. As friends, I said cautiously. He nodded. As friends. If that's all you want. The implied question hung between us, delicate and dangerous. I don't know what I want, I confessed. I know I'm still angry. Still hurt. But I also know that seeing you again has made me realize I never really let go. I never did either, he said quietly. Not for a moment. A breeze picked up, carrying the scent of salt water from the sound below. I shivered slightly, and Nate instinctively moved as if to put his arm around me, stopping himself at the last moment. Sorry, he said, catching himself. Old habits. The moment crystallized something for me, how seamlessly we still fit, even after everything. How familiar his presence still felt, despite the months and miles of separation. I'm not ready to forgive you, I said, the words coming slowly, painfully. What you did, it broke something in me, Nate. Something I'm still trying to fix. He nodded, accepting this without protest. But, I continued, the decision forming even as I spoke it, I'm willing to try. To see if we can find some way forward. As friends, to start. The hope that bloomed across his features was almost painful to witness. I'd like that, he said simply. I'd like that very much. I have conditions, I warned. Boundaries. Of course. Anything. We take it slow. Very slow. Coffee in public places. Group outings with friends. No private meetings, no late-night calls, no complications. He nodded, his expression solemn. Understood. And I reserve the right to walk away at any time. No questions, no guilt, no second chances if this doesn't feel right. Absolutely. And you need to understand something fundamental, I said, meeting his gaze directly. I'm not the same woman you knew in Boston. I've changed. Grown. Hardened, as you pointed out. I know, he said, and I believe that he did. I don't expect you to be who you were. I just want the chance to know who you are now. I considered his words, weighing them against the protective walls I'd built over the past months. Okay, I said finally. We can try. One step at a time. The smile that spread across his face was like sunshine breaking through clouds, a glimpse of the Nate I'd fallen in love with, the Nate who'd existed before doubt and fear had transformed him into someone I didn't recognize. "Thank you, Eliza," he said softly. "I know I don't deserve this chance." "No," I agreed, "you don't. But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for me. Because I need to know if I can move forward without always looking over my shoulder at what we were." He nodded, understanding exactly what I meant, as he so often had during our years together. As the last light faded from the sky, we sat in a surprisingly comfortable silence, watching Seattle illuminate before us, neither of us ready to leave this moment of fragile new beginning. "It's getting late," I said finally. "I should head home." "Can I walk you to your bus stop?" he asked, then quickly added, "That's probably crossing a boundary." "Sorry." I surprised myself by laughing, a small, genuine sound. "It's fine. Yes, you can walk me to the bus stop." We made our way down the hill in companionable silence, the city spread out before us like a constellation of possibilities. At the bus stop, he kept a respectful distance. "So," he said, uncharacteristically awkward. "What happens now?" I considered the question, along with the tentative hope I'd allowed to take root over the past hour. "Now we start small," I decided. "Coffee, maybe. Next week." "I know a place," he offered with a hesitant smile. "Though you might want to pick somewhere I don't work. Unless you enjoy watching me make lattes." "I'll text you," I said as my bus approached. "Good night, Nate." "Good night, Eliza." As the bus pulled away, I caught a glimpse of him still standing there, watching me leave with an expression I couldn't quite read in the gathering darkness. I didn't know what would come next, if this tentative peace could evolve into friendship, if friendship could somehow heal what had been so brutally broken, if healing might someday lead to something more. But for the first time since I'd fled Boston with a shattered heart, I felt something unexpected stirring within me. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But possibility. The faint, flickering light of a candle in the darkness, suggesting that perhaps the universe hadn't been cruel in bringing Nate back into my life, but offering a chance to rewrite an ending that had never felt complete. As the city lights blurred past the bus window, I allowed myself to consider what that might mean, not just for the wounds of the past, but for the unwritten pages of the future. Not closure, then. But perhaps its opposite. A new beginning. Over the next few weeks, Nate and I established a tentative routine: coffee every Wednesday afternoon at a neutral café halfway between the Tribune offices and the university. Public, casual, bounded by clear time limits dictated by our respective schedules. Safe. We talked about everything and nothing: his doctoral research, my latest photography assignments, the quirks of Seattle compared to Boston, books we'd read, films we'd seen. Carefully avoiding the deeper currents that still ran beneath the surface of our interactions. Until one rainy Thursday when my phone chimed with a text from him outside our established routine. "Are you free tomorrow evening? There's something I'd like to show you. It's important." I stared at the message, feeling the boundaries I'd so carefully constructed begin to waver. Tomorrow was Friday, not our usual Wednesday. Evening, not afternoon. Something important, not casual coffee. Dangerous territory. But curiosity, that persistent, troublesome quality that had made me a good photojournalist and a sometimes reckless human, got the better of me. "What time and where?" I replied after several minutes of deliberation. 7 p.m., I'll meet you at the Pier 62 entrance." I waited for elaboration, but none came. Just the cryptic invitation and a location on Seattle's waterfront. Okay. See you then. I answered finally, both intrigued and wary of what he might have planned. The next evening, I arrived at Pier 62 precisely at 7, scanning the area for Nate's familiar form. The waterfront was alive with activity, tourists taking photos, locals walking dogs, street performers entertaining small crowds. Eliza. I turned to find him approaching, a canvas messenger bag slung across his chest, looking somewhat nervous. Hi, I greeted him, suddenly self-conscious. This felt different from our casual coffee meetings, more intentional, more charged with unspoken meaning. Thanks for coming, he said. I know this is outside our usual arrangement. What's going on, Nate? What did you want to show me? He gestured toward the water. It's easier if I just show you. It's a bit of a walk, is that okay? I nodded, falling into step beside him as he led us along the waterfront promenade, past souvenir shops and seafood restaurants, the scent of salt water and fried food mingling in the cool evening air. After about 10 minutes, he veered toward a small marina I hadn't noticed before, stopping at a dock where several boats were moored. This way, he said, leading me toward the end of the pier where a small crowd had gathered. As we drew closer, I realized what had attracted the crowd's attention. A family of sea lions had claimed one of the floating platforms, their barking echoing across the water as they jostled for position in the last rays of evening sunlight. Sea lions? I asked, confused about why he'd brought me here with such secrecy. Not just any sea lions, he explained, unzipping his messenger bag and pulling out a familiar object, my old Nikon D850, the camera I'd left behind in Boston. I stared at it, then at him. How? Charlotte, he admitted. After I ran into you, I contacted her, explained that I'd found you in Seattle, that we were talking again. She didn't tell me anything about where you lived, but she did agree to send me this. She said you'd left it in storage in Boston. I reached for the camera with trembling hands, the weight of it achingly familiar as it settled into my palms. I couldn't take it with me, I said softly. Too many memories. I know, he said. But look at the flash card. Confused, I turned on the camera, navigating to the memory card contents. And froze. There they were, hundreds of photos from our last trip together, a weekend excursion to Monterey Bay where I documented a family of sea lions nearly identical to the ones before us now. Photos I'd never downloaded, never seen after that trip that had occurred just 2 weeks before our breakup. I didn't know you still had these, I whispered, scrolling through image after image, moments of joy and wonder preserved in digital amber, a time capsule from our shared past. I didn't either, Nate admitted quietly. When Charlotte sent the camera, I noticed the card was still in it. I just thought, you might want this back. All of it. I looked up from the viewfinder, meeting his eyes. The unspoken meaning in his gesture hit me with unexpected force. He wasn't just returning my camera. He was returning a piece of myself I'd abandoned in my desperate flight from pain. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. This means more than I can say. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. I know we agreed to take things slow. To be just friends. And I respect that boundary completely. But I needed you to know that I see you, Eliza. The photographer. The observer. The woman who finds beauty in unexpected places. That part of you didn't disappear when you left Boston. It just went dormant for a while. The sea lions barked and shuffled below us, oblivious to the human drama unfolding above. I lifted the camera instinctively, finding my frame and capturing their playful movements. The familiar click of the shutter felt like coming home. I've missed this, I admitted, lowering the camera. Not just photography, I still do that for work. But shooting for joy. For discovery. I know, he said simply. I've always loved watching you see the world through that lens. It was like glimpsing how your mind works, finding patterns and moments that others miss. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of shared history and possible futures suspended between us like motes in evening light. I'm not ready, I said finally, the words both a warning and a confession. For whatever this might become. I'm still healing, he finished for me. I know. I'm not asking for anything more than you're ready to give, Eliza. I just wanted to return something that belongs to you. I nodded, grateful for his understanding. As the last light faded from the sky, we watched the sea lions together, our shoulders not quite touching, the camera a tangible bridge between past and future. Not closure, then. But perhaps something more precious. A continuation.